Hey there, Red Devil Nation. Welcome back for another Alumni Spotlight. Today, we are honored to have 2019 Dickinson Squash graduate Cory Litman join us. Cory, thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So before we dive into your time here at Dickinson, just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you grew up.
My name is Cory. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to a high school called Lower Merion. Played on the squash team there. Middle school, high school, we were one of the only public schools in the country at the time to have a team. And I was fortunate enough to play at Dickinson. I got recruited by Chris Sackby and played all 4 years, was the captain junior, senior year. Got our team from 55th in the country when I came in to eventually 17th in the country, which was a pretty big leap for us.
And you mentioned that, where you grew up in Lower Merion, knowing that area and growing up there myself, that's a pretty big squash area. You have, Lower Merion, which you said your public school had a squash team. You're just outside Philadelphia, where arguably two of the best squash programs in the country reside with Drexel and Penn. And you're right down the street from one of the best top squash facilities in the country in Merion Cricket Club. Talk about growing up in that area and how you got into squash and how that area actually cultivated that sport for you and that atmosphere.
Philadelphia is one of two big hotbeds of squash. It's kind of Philadelphia, and then you have New York City and the Greenwich area right above it. It's a hotbed for a couple of different reasons, like you said, Penn, Drexel, not only two of the best programs, but two of the nicest facilities, and just have had these programs forever. The coaches are amazing. The programs are very well known. And then you have all these boarding schools in the area. I'm sure, as you know, you got Haverford, Episcopal, Shipley, Penn Charter, all of which who've had teams forever, who kind of attract a squash type of student, squash type of kid, if that makes any sense. So we played. We didn't have courts at our school. We would use a local country club down the road called the Kinwood Club. They only had 3 courts for roughly 60, 70 players. So there were a lot of times where we weren't even really getting any court time during practice. It was not ideal, but we took a lot of pride in being one of the only public schools. We were one of 2 public schools in the country at the time to have a team. And we were consistently top 15 in the country. So we took a lot of pride in that. My entire high school team ended up going on to play in college, one actually at Dickinson as well. But it was cool. We kind of felt like the outsider a little bit, but again, we took a lot of pride in that. And then how I got into it was kind of through tennis. I grew up playing at a place called Germantown, kind of in northwest Philadelphia. I started off playing tennis there, and they had squash facility there as well. Me and my brother got into it, and we eventually got to an age where my dad was kind of all right, pick one. Squash it was, and ended up being a good decision.
Yeah. And when you said you guys took a lot of pride, obviously in your sport and representing Lower Merion as one of the only public schools to have a squash team, what did it mean to you guys when you were able to step on the court with some of these private schools, Haverford, Malvern, Germantown, Episcopal, Shipley, and compete and realize that you were competing with some of the top players in the nation?
It was really cool. These are programs that had been around way longer than Lower Merion had, and had facilities to play at, had, just history and coaching. And it wasn't ever really a realization. I was wow, we're a lot better. We knew we were better. And I think sometimes that was not great for us, because we were high schoolers, and some of the time we didn't really know how to act properly. But I think we even took pride in that a little bit, which is not great. Just because, squash events, you get a specific type of person who doesn't necessarily getting a little angry and competitive, but we were all for it, and it was fun. It was fun.
And when it came time for you to decide you wanted to move on to college, what made you decide that you wanted to pursue squash in college, and what attracted you to Coach Saxby and the Dickinson program?
I always knew I wanted to play squash in college. I have absolutely loved the sport since I started playing it, and I never had any intention of not playing in college. I was just trying to figure out realistically where I could get in and where I could play, because squash in college is competitive because there's not a lot of, I mean, there's compared to other sports, there's not a lot of programs out there. So you really got to fight for your spot. The program at Dickinson was really cool because Chris Sackey was the coach there, who legend. Really young coach, really young guy, much like Chris actually, who my senior year in college, they had just started their very first year as a varsity program. So it's kind of the opportunity to build, like, from the ground, a team, a program. It was, Sackey kind of reached out to our recruiting class was massive because it was the first year they could take recruits. So Sackey took about seven guys and 7 or 8 girls. And again, the squash community is small, so we all knew each other. He took a lot of kids from the Philadelphia area, just almost by coincidence. So we all knew each other. We were all like, yo, let's do this. This is going to be awesome. The school itself was very attractive to me. It was kind of just like a perfect storm of things, and ended up working out really, really well. Sackey was unbelievable. I think for the college squash world, having a young coach, Chris Sackey, Chris Fernandez, is also literally a perfect example. Someone you can kind of relate to and talk to means like everything. So for me, that was very attractive. And it was just kind of the perfect storm. I ended up getting a great read from Dickinson, visited a couple times, and was like, yeah, this will work.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned something that I think is important, and that is the squash community being as small as it is. You knew some of your classmates coming in, and that is pretty important when you're going to college. College can be intimidating enough, but now you also have to make friends, get to know people. How did that help you coming into Dickinson, knowing part of your recruiting class and having that background of being friendly with them both on and off the court?
Tremendously. I mean, it's anyone watching this who's on a team can, I'm sure, relate to this. Just being able to come in on day one, having already, had a group chat or talked with people on the team, just kind of knowing them, having place to go with them, not kind of being on your own, which it helped tremendously. And then that, on top of that, there was a team, a squash team. It was nobody that had been recruited or was like, very much into it, but they were there. They looked out for us tremendously. Yeah. I couldn't recommend being on a team enough. And especially going in there with kids that you had been playing squash with for your entire life almost. It was cool.
With the program being so young when you arrived here, how did you guys lay out your goals and expectations for the program, and how did you guys come together in going and knowing what you wanted to build here at Dickinson within the squash program itself?
It's kind of hard to figure out because we were such a new team. So squash rosters are made up of top 9, right? Our top 7 were all freshmen. There's not many teams like that in the country. Mm-hmm. So our top 7 had no idea, we're very, very new to this. We're still a little bit immature and still trying to, not even quite like adults yet, right? So had no idea what to expect, and we were kind of just like, we're just going to play schools, beat them, and see what happens, right? So our first year, we had a very somewhat weak schedule because the previous year we had not been varsity, so they were playing schools that were, club teams are just not very experienced, right? So the first year was a little bit of adjustment, but a lot of the matches that we had were kind of breezes, and it was a nice little ease into the competitiveness of college squash, especially for a team that was all freshmen.
Mm-hmm. And as you went through your time here in the squash program, you guys are accumulating more and more talent. You're rising through the ranks. Coach Saxby leaves, Coach Fernandez comes in, and the success just kept coming. What do you credit that to, both from the coaching ranks, but also from you guys as players?
It's kind of a culture that we it sounds a little cliche, I understand, but the kind of culture that we had was just awesome. I mean, I think where we differ than a lot of other teams is that our roster is, 12, 13 players max, right? Where, we're able to like go to practice, right, and go to dinner, and literally one table could just be us, whereas a lot of other teams are very spread out. There's a bunch of different cliques throughout the teams. it was just us, right? And it was a small team, and we were all different kids, but we got along really, really well. A lot of that is due to Chris Sackvey, Chris Fernandez, kind of just instilling that culture. And it was something that never really, we had like a couple bumps along the way, but my 4 years, the team atmosphere was always excellent, enjoyable to everyone, very inclusive. We ended up throughout my year getting a ton of international kids who not only were insane at squash, but just good kids, right? Like really, really good kids. And I think Sackvey and Fernandez did an excellent job at recruiting not only good players, but kids that they thought would be good fits for our team, which above a lot is very important to us. We would rather have maintained that culture over just dominating, which is a weird compromise to make, but I think it was the right decision.
Mm-hmm. And there is something unique to that in squash, that it's a very international sport. And most teams, it's going to be all Americans, but you look down a squash roster and you might only see 3 or 4 Americans, and then you're going to see 7 or 8 international players. How did being teammates with international players give you a broader perspective of the world and understanding other countries, other cultures, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's the one thing about college squash, right? You look at the top teams in the world, in the country, their teams are 90% international. Squash is just not as big here as it is in, say Egypt, Mexico, New Zealand, wherever. So we had, let's say we had a kid from Egypt, New Zealand, Netherlands, Mexico, Czech Republic, Ecuador. It goes on, right? And they were all some of my best friends, right? It was fun. It was really fun, making them a little Americanized, and we always kind of had to, try to imagine what their perspective was coming into the U.S. for maybe their first time ever to a place like Carlisle, which it was cool. It was fun. It was a learning experience for everyone involved, and everyone ended up enjoying it, man. I mean, to travel and to do things with kids from completely different cultures was a gift. Mm-hmm. These are kids I still talk to this day, and that it was amazing. Yeah, love those guys.
And squash is also a pretty unique sport too, where you actually spend time with your opponent, because you've either played with them in tournaments, you then sit with them and score a match, and then you go on the court and play against them. Talk about that experience and how actually knowing your opponent and being able to build friendships with your opponent is a unique thing to squash, but how it actually helps you become a more well-rounded person.
Yeah, that just goes back to, right, so squash being such a small world where everyone. If you don't know them personally, you've heard of them, you've seen them play at tournaments. Everyone goes to the same tournaments in the Northeast area. There's a US Squash website where you can see all the rankings, you can watch everything, so all the international kids. It's a little weird, right? It's like a little weird going into a match and that they've like researched you online, they know who you are, you've done the same thing. But it's cool. I mean, like in high school and early college, it's a little bit weird because you're still not like very mature yet and how to like kind of deal with that. But kind of after I graduated and I've kind of like, I think back at it, it's like awesome to be able to build a relationship just, by playing a sport. Mm-hmm. It's cool, but it's weird because you spend a lot of time with them. You got to sit down, you ref with them, you play with them, and it's close proximity. You're talking. It's sometimes gets a little heated, but like it's fun, man. It's really, really fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, off the court, when you came to Dickinson, did you know what you wanted to major in? And if you didn't, how did Dickinson help you find your passion for your major and find the path that you wanted to go down?
Yeah, so I had no idea what I wanted to do. My freshman year, I took a couple biology courses. I was like, this is fun. I like this. This is hard, but like this is work that I could do, right? So freshman year, biology major. Second semester, freshman year, I believe, they were like, all right, time to take orgo, time to take chem. Got into chemistry class, said, this is not going to work. Don't understand what's going on here. Dropped that. Some other classes that I were taking at the time, I took an educational studies class with a lady called Professor Bear. To this day, far and away the best professor I have ever had at Dickinson. She's not there anymore. I think she just left, but I actually got introduced to her from her daughter. Her daughter was my FIG mentor, my first year interest group. mentor was her mom. I ended up taking one of those classes. It was like, this is like the most enjoyable thing I've ever done. I not only like this class, it's interesting. I'm doing well. I was like, all right, biology is not going to work. Let's try educational studies. Every single class, every single professor that I had in that entire curriculum was just unbelievable and was like, this is what college experience should feel like. And it was also something that I became a little bit passionate about. So it was a weird little trajectory from biology to educational studies, but incredibly happy with the decision that I made. Yeah, if I could do it all again, I'd start educational studies day one.
And that's something that Dickinson really prides itself on is the small classes and the getting to know your professors. And you just mentioned it with Professor Bear.
Mhm.
How do you think getting to know that professor, just not as a teacher, but as a person, helped you find that passion?
It was, super, super important. Getting to know them on more like a personal level and kind of stepping back from just like the grades and everything is very important to kind of see their side of everything. They can kind of see, what's going on with you, your life, and having kind of like an intimate relationship with all the students was amazing. My job now, when I talk to my kids about, where they want to go for college, one of the biggest conversations that I like to have with them is the difference between a big school and a small school. And then more specifically, getting to know your professor, having small classes, having that type of intimacy, which I get is not for everybody, but for me was perfect. And I don't know how I would have gotten through college if I gone to classes that were 40 plus people every time. My senior year, I was in classes that were like 5 or 6 people, and it was like, it's got its pros and cons, right? But it was awesome.
You mentioned your professional career now. You are at City Squash, correct?
Correct.
And how do you think that your time here at Dickinson and being in your major has helped you in your career getting to City Squash and build a connection with the kids that you work with now?
Well, obviously from a squash perspective, it's been, great because I got to be the captain of the team at Dickinson for a couple of years, and being able to be in a position where you're kind of in charge or more or less a mentor to some of the younger students. And just being able to still play squash but still have like an academic component to it is kind of like my college experience kind of wrapped up in one sentence, right? Being able to play squash but still got the academic side of things. So it's really kind of just a perfect combination of what Dickinson, I think, prepared me for, what the educational studies department prepared me for.
And the lessons that you learned from Coach Saxby and Coach Fernandez, how have you taken those and applied them to your job now? And what were the biggest lessons that you learned from them that you see yourself now implementing into your coaching and your mentorship with the young men and women you work with?
Well, one of the big things that I talked about that I really liked about both of the Chris's was that they were easily relatable, nice guys, and just, like willing to listen. So that's one of the main things that I've tried to kind of take over here is being available, being easily relatable. And I think I like to think that's been working out pretty well. Chris Fernandez was massively helpful with my transition here. Chris Fernandez worked here before my exact position. I was his summer intern going into my senior year of college. And Chris Fernandez left here. I came in here. It was a little switcheroo, but he helped me massively with the transition and just kind of like what to expect, how to go about things, because everything that he did here that I saw was great.
Mm-hmm. When you look back at Dickinson and your time here, what gave you so much pride in wearing a Red Devil uniform?
That team culture, and that kind of stems all the way back to high school, how we had that culture, which was not necessarily a very mature or productive culture, but in college it was mature and productive, but we still kind of had a little bit of an edge. That made me incredibly proud to have a team of guys from across the world who got along really, really well and just went out there and competed and won. The friends that I made at Dickinson, again, pros of being at a small school, a lot of the people, you recognize everyone. Yeah, I'm very, very proud of my time at Dickinson Squash for sure.
And when you talk with the young men and women that you work with and you're helping them in their college search, why would you encourage them to look at a liberal arts school like Dickinson College?
Just kind of talking about my experiences there, and it's a tough conversation because I understand that these kids, they come from a different background, so I think some of their college preferences may be a little bit different. but just I talk a lot about it being a small school, having a team that is in a small school, being, having that culture and knowing your professors, knowing everyone on campus. I think there are far more pros to being at a small liberal arts school than there are a big state school. That's just my opinion. But that's kind of what I push here.
Mm-hmm. And the last question for you is, when you reflect back on your time here as a student athlete, if you could sum up Dickinson in one word, what would that be?
In one word?
Or one phrase if you can't think of a word.
Yeah. Honestly, just a growing experience. I guess growth would be the most accurate way to describe it. And that wouldn't have been possible without the team, without my professors. Growth, which I guess is not a great word because I guess that's the whole idea of college, right? But I think for me personally, I grew a lot, matured a lot. But again, that's not possible without the team.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cory, thanks so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to share your story and journey with the Dickinson community.
Absolutely, me too.
Take care, and we look forward to seeing you back on campus when we're open and playing squash again.
I hope so.